Please don't explode, please don't explode. Ooh, well, we got lucky this time. Hello everybody and welcome. We are back at my museum, the Museum for Interplanetary Exploration, as I decided to call it. And well, if you remember, we had that problem that things were kind of slipping down. So I tried to use my engineer to change all of that, and well, this happened. Suboptimal.
Again!
Yeah, so what I had to do is basically remove all of those, what do you want to call them, those rotator things or servo motors from the robotic parts. I had to replace all of those panels, and then I removed the ground anchor, because the ground anchor, unfortunately I don't have footage of that, the ground anchor was already about a meter or something above ground, so basically defeating the entire purpose of that thing. So when you watch the first episode of the series and you see me praising the ground anchor for keeping stuff in place, it did the exact opposite. So yeah, I was not happy. What I was happy about was this here, the precision landing of the Joolishka. And it was right on target. So we move on to the next. Yes, Ozymandias is now here. And it's going to have to do the same thing, basically get down to the surface, get close to the museum, and then land on the correct spot, facing its own exhibit. Once again, I'm fast forwarding through the entire descent process, so you can see there is no shenanigans involved. Unfortunately, well, since Ozymandias has a lot less thrust-to-weight ratio than the Joolishka, I tried to play it safe, and since I had so many fuel reserves, I didn't mind basically leaving the engines on all the time. But here's the tricky part, flipping over from vertical into the horizontal configuration, because Ozymandias was designed to land flat on its belly, so I could utilize the drills and ISRU better. I didn't have the idea to do that in a vertical spaceship, as I did then later with Invictus. Mainly probably because I thought this looks better, but it made things a lot harder when flying. Fortunately, I didn't have to refuel that often, or at least not with every planet I visited. But yeah, I had to refuel quite a lot, but fortunately this thing is, for its size, rather maneuverable, and I spent a lot of time in the editor to keep it balanced, so yay! And now, the big one. Yes, the most powerful spaceship ever created by Kerbal kind, at least in my save games. It's coming down now to join its brethren, so to speak. I mean, they don't live, so they are not brothers or sisters. But maybe machine brethren? I don't know. The machine spirit. If you know Warhammer 40k, you know what I mean. So yeah, once again, I have abundant amounts of fuel. I really was generous with the refueling process, so I could just hop around. And once again, unfortunately, we are seeing that graphics glitch where I have too many lights in this scene, and therefore the Unity engine just says, nope. And, ooh, yep. We bounced off the surface. There was sort of a period when I got kind of bored and looked away from the screen, and I forgot to turn off on the throttle again. And then that had happened, but fortunately nothing exploded or anything. Invictus is still intact, and this was also a bit of a hairy situation. I was afraid it would topple over, but fortunately it didn't, because I caught it in time, using the landing gear actually to propel it upwards a little bit, which works on Minmus, thankfully. Wouldn't work on a planet with higher gravity, of course. And here, once again, I'm using the throttle to really just let that thing hover, and then using the reaction control system to for their lateral movements. And yes, once we're in the light cone, that's exactly why I placed that rover there. Once the vehicle is in the center of that light cone, it should be in the correct position. And yes, here we are. And with this, we are doing our opening event. This is now a complete tour of the finished Museum for Interplanetary Exploration on Minmus. First up, we're going to take a closer look at Joolishka, or at least this iteration of Joolishka, because the original was a little bit less complex than this one. It didn't have the radiators on top, it didn't have the additional fuel tanks inside of its cargo bay, and it actually had a lander. A lander it had to loan to Ozymandias, this vehicle we can see here. This was my great tour of the outer planet system. And yes, we have the second lander, which was transported to it by Joolishka in a very, very long mission. As I said in the previous video, 2 solar panels are missing, but I don't mind because they would hit the ground anyway here. So for the purposes of this exhibit, it is fine. And then last but certainly not least, we're coming to Invictus. My, well, dare I say, opus magnum for Kerbal Space Program 1. This is the ultimate spaceship in my book. It can go anywhere, it can land on, well, itself not, but the lander it has in its back can land basically anywhere except Eve. Well, it can land on Eve, but it can't return. It also has a rover to collect any amounts of sign you can imagine. And with that, we got the rocket garden covered, and we're going to head inside. First up, we're going to head into the Joolishka exhibit. And as with any big mission, we're going to start with a big launch. In the central pillar, we're going to see 4 images of the launch of the Joolishka. The third one you can see here, that was actually the thumbnail for the first episode of this series. And then, of course, the mission went straight to Jool, where for the first time in this save game, Kerbals dove into the atmosphere of Jool and survived to tell the tale. We also landed on Tidal, the hardest target in that planetary moon system. And then we went to the Magnificence Lathe, where we landed actually in the water. Yep, we bathed in Lathe. And then, of course, we went on to Val, the icy moon that is in the innermost. Well, is it the innermost? It's rather in the center of the Jool planetary system. And then, of course, we went to the small ones. The little planetoids called Bob and Paul on the outskirts of Jool. You can see on the left-hand side Bob and on the right-hand side Paul, where we visited. And with that, we're going to continue onwards in our museum into the Ozymandias exhibit. Once again, we are seeing the launch front and center because every mission that goes to space has to start with some type of launch, doesn't it? And then, of course, the first target was Sarnus, the ringed gas giant of the Outer Planets mod. I really enjoyed staying there because the visuals were just so breathtaking, even back then in the rudimentary form of visual mods that I had back in, well, yeah, it was 2015, almost 8 years ago. We landed on Slate and we tried to push the lander away into orbit, but unfortunately we couldn't. We just managed to get there with the signs on our backs. And then, of course, Joolishka was refurbished and brought a new lander, and with that we explored the rest of the Sarnus system. We landed on Ovok, we landed on Hale, we landed on Elu, which in the Outer Planets mod is a moon of Sarnus. And we went to Tecto and landed there as well, which is a Titan analog, maybe? Anyway, then it was time to go to Erlem, which also is a ringed gas giant, but its rings are much less pronounced than Sarnus, and it has an interesting moon around the moon that is called Tal, and the bigger moon is called Val, because it looks like a walnut, so maybe more wall than Val. Whatever, you decide in the comments. And then, of course, we have Nidon. Nidon is basically the Neptune analog, and after that we went to Plock, where we took sort of a family picture of the crew. And now we're heading to the Invictus exhibit. This is the most recent mission, so it has the best visuals and it has the best equipment you can imagine. First target, of course, was Eve, where we had our special quadcopter lander. Quadcopter, why that? Because with that I could raise it to 18 kilometers and didn't have to use any fuel, so it was lighter. Then, of course, Gilly. And we have some kind of family picture of all the different Invictus iterations that I tried out. Then it was time to head to hot Moho. And after Moho we took a break sort of and went back to the Kerbal system and went to Minmus and the Mun. Afterwards, of course, came the magnificent sandstorms of Duna and the fascinating spikes of Ike. The red, big, spiky things you can see here. We even dove off of one and fortunately didn't hurt ourselves. You can see Invictus outside in the back waiting for visitors. And then, of course, we went canyon driving in Draz. And then afterwards we did a complete Jool 5 where we visited every moon of Jool and around the gas giant. And then let's head up those cursed stairs. And here we are in the outer planet section of the Invictus mission. Sarnes, of course, was first, where we went to Slate, the hardest moon of the entire system. But fortunately the lander held up and we managed to grab all the signs we needed and headed to Ovok, that egg-shaped little moon where we refueled for the first time. Well, for the first time in the Outer Planets mod, we did refuel a lot during the regular planets, or stock planets. And then the rest of the moons of the Sarnes system. There we had Elu and Hale and Tecto, which all looked a bit different from when Ozymandias went there. So some interesting phenomena happened in the cosmos between 8 years, so things have changed rather significantly. Also, as you can see here from the pictures from Erlum, where we went to Polta, Priox, Val and Tal, of course. And then, to my moment of greatest desolation on the moon Thatmo, one of the two moons of Nidon. Nowhere else in Kerbal Space Program did I feel so alone when on the plains of Thatmo. That was really an eerie feeling. But in the end, we also discovered something new, the moon Charon around Plock. Well, maybe it's more or less a binary system, but in the original OPM mod there was only Plock, but now it has Charon as its companion. And with that, we close out our museum tour just like we closed the mission for Invictus, with a long view of our home, the planet Kerbin. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.